and welcome to our Best of 2014 Scots Whay Hae podcast. It's also podcast number 50 for us, and I'm joined appropriately by Chris Ward.
Hello.
And Ian is here as well, as always.
Hello.
And because we three started this
we did.
3 years ago in the summer.
First episode.
Exactly. So I think it's quite nice that it's the three of us here for number 50. So how this is going to work is, unfortunately, we would hope to be joined by Scots Whay Hae's Dr. Books, as we like to call him, Ronnie Young. But he can't make it. He sends his apologies, and he has also sent his yearly Falkirk missive. We're going to start off with that, and then just kind of see where that takes us, and by the end we'll probably be scrapping on the floor. So I've just, of course, have to find where the heck I've put that missive, and here we go. Straight out of Falkirk, as I like to call it. Hello to all you good people in Scots Whay Hae land. Sorry I can't be with you to celebrate the end of another year. It was like the Queen's speech.
Forever dying.
It is. But I thought, in more ways than one, but I thought I'd send along some brief reflections on whatever the flip just happened in 2014. I call it Mr. Ron's festive hamper of things that happened in 2014.
Okay.
And so Mr. Ron, good on you. In that spirit, I'll begin with something that happened in 1814. In 1814, Sir Walter Scott published his first novel, Waverley. I mentioned that because...
You just finished reading it?
Because it took him 200 years to read it. But, no, low blow, Chris, low blow. I mentioned this because 2014 was, of course, the 200th anniversary of its publication. No flies on Ronnie's arithmetic there. Yeah. And because you've read it and might therefore be able to say something about it, the historical novel and indeed the place of Scotland within Britain. I think he's asking too much of us there
a little bit.
in this podcast, but I like his ambition. It was 200 Years of Waverley. You have read Waverley, have you?
I have, yes.
You were forced to read it?
Forced to, yeah, that was one of the opening songs.
I always remember
a Scottish literature degree. Yeah.
I always remember being told by one of our lecturers that it was like taking a long hot bath. Bathing in Waverley, and I thought that was really strange.
I remember being told by I
did feel wrinkly once I finished it.
Yeah, being told by I think a tutor rather than a lecturer to skip the first 6 chapters. that was their tip for getting into Waverley. Is just skip the first 6 chapters. Nothing happens.
I could say no. I'm not going to say what I could say, but I'm a bit of a Scott fan. I have to say. We've spoken about this previously.
I got more into Scott the more I read of Scott. Like I liked Waverley. It was kind of like okay, I appreciate it for what it is. But yeah, no, as I went on,
it's a debut novel.
Yeah. But then no, it was one of those things. As you go through, every year it's like one more of them. So we had Old Mortality and Heart of Midlothian as well. And Heart of Midlothian I loved. By the time I built up enough of a resistance, yeah. Like I was trying to grope around for a better euphemism there for it, but no, if we're just going to say it, then a bit of resistance to Scott. Yeah, no, but Heart of Midlothian is I absolutely love. Yeah,
I agree. And I think it would have been interesting if Scott was about today to see what he would have made of political events this year, considering he always said his heart was in Scotland, but his head was kind of in Britain or Northern Britain or whatever Britain that he wanted to talk about. Back to Mr. Ron's Christmas hamper. Speaking of Scotland and Britain, I'm fairly certain something else of major significance happened in 2014, but I'll be damned if I can remember what it was. Besides a lingering feeling of exhilaration, I experienced flashbacks to the now inexplicable events of September. Events such as a bizarre love letter to Scotland from 200 assorted celebrities, which contained the weighty reflections of a think tank, composed in part of constitutional expert Mick Jagger, political analyst June Sarpong, Alan Titchmarsh, Kirsty Alsop, and Sting. June Sarpong. Around about the same time, National Collective brought a fresh and creative voice to Scottish and even British cultural and political life, for which they've just made the list's top 10 cultural moments in 2014. He scrolls down in anticipation. Anyway, whatever took place back in September all seemed a lot more captivating than the Commonwealth Games Glasgow 2014. The entirety of which I definitely managed to miss.
Yeah, that makes 2 of us.
Okay, it kind of makes 3 of us, but never mind. It was been really busy in the pubs. Shame really, because I also missed the opening ceremony, a controversial celebration of kitsch Scottishness, bedecked in extremely tasteful kilted uniforms. And Ronnie has sent us a lovely picture which we'll use, I think, of the what colour would you say that was?
I would say
aqua?
that's aqua.
Cyan?
I would say seaweed blue.
Seaweed blue, lovely. Well, I'm sure you all know what he's talking about. Odd happenings in Glasgow continued in the medium of film with Under the Skin, starring Scarlett Johansson, and adapted from the novel by Michael Faber. To me, Jonathan Glazer's portrayal of the predatory main character stalking around Scotland seemed like too many set pieces that never quite came together as a complete narrative. Hold yourself.
Hold me back.
That said, the film did succeed in taking something as familiar as everyday life in Glasgow and making it appear eerily unfamiliar, a kind of vernacular representation of Freud's definition even of the uncanny. I think the vodka had kicked in by this point. Film leads me to the siren call of Scottish music. It had definitely kicked in by this point. Like a horny Glaswegian stumbling into a dark pool of sexy alien love goo. And all across the city tonight, there'll be people doing exactly that.
Much that, yeah.
Anyway, much could be mentioned here, including a Mercury Music Prize winner from Edinburgh's Young Fathers. But two crossovers between music and film perhaps deserve attention. Firstly, King Creosote's soundtrack to the film From Scotland with Love. Secondly, the musical God Help the Girl, the directorial debut of Belle and Sebastian's King of Twee, Stuart Murdoch. And on that whimsical note, I'll leave you gentlemen and you listeners to chew on the rest of the leftovers of the year that was. Until 2015, wishing you all the very best. The Reverend Ronnie Young.
He's some man.
He's some man. It's fantastic. But that's good, because I think it leads us into a discussion of certainly the two films that he mentions.
Yes.
So let's start with Under the Skin.
Okay.
Chris, your thoughts?
I was really blown away by Under the Skin. I thought it was great. I think it's both of them actually, both Under the Skin and God Help the Girl, I think were kind of in their way landmarks for Scottish film, I think, because they're two examples of things that I think I'd like to see more of from Scottish cinema, even though they're not strictly speaking. I mean, I know Under the Skin is like filmed in Glasgow and everything, but it's not strictly speaking a wholly Scottish creative team. Jonathan Glazer's English, Scarlett Johansson's American. It's kind of an international production, but I think it really shows off the cinematic potential of Glasgow and Scotland in a way that's palatable to an international audience, but doesn't water anything down. I think one of my favourite line deliveries of the year is Scarlett Johansson driving her van through the hordes of Celtic supporters and hearing one of them off camera shout "fuck you, you prick," which was great. Just guys caught on hidden camera going giving directions to the M8, do you know where the big Tesco is, that kind of thing. And I thought that was great to see that put on film and not be deemed too alienating, no pun intended, for the for an international audience. And it's also something that's completely new and taking a chance, just formally and visually and thematically. A lot of the stuff that it did was it wasn't like, well, this is good for a Scottish film. It's like, this is a good film. This is turning up on people all over the world's best of list, which is a massive thing for Scottish film, I think. And with God Help the Girl, it's a musical. It's an original musical, which is a big enough thing for 2014. But for an original musical to be set in Glasgow, I thought was a big deal as well. And it was a way of kind of getting away from the stereotypes of Glasgow on film, which has, for better or worse, kind of stagnated into like social realism. Your Ken Loaches, your Peter Mullins, I think, in a lot of ways. And it was both of them were ways of looking at the city that I think opened it up to like the famous passage from Lanark about nobody ever imagines living here because nobody imagines it in art. I think these were two really good examples of the city being reimagined in art in ways that it hadn't really been seen before on screen.
I agree with you about Under the Skin. I think it was a masterpiece. I think it was and one of those odd films where you come away and you look at the world outside slightly different than you did when you went in, and you look at the people slightly differently from when you went in, and that stays with you for some time. I'll talk about God Help the Girl later, because I don't think I'm quite as big a fan of it as you are, but it was astonishing to see a recognisable Glasgow, and one that has been portrayed elsewhere, kind of manipulated in this way to be a kind of alien landscape.
Yeah.
And actually, she's the alien in it, but she's the identifiable figure, or at least becomes the identifiable figure, and it's all the other folk that she meets that become strange to us. Is that, you think that's fair?
Yeah, I absolutely do think that's fair, and there's so much going on with it as well. I mean, obviously I think I saw a few reviews that noted that, like, you know, just talking about like the way she dressed and things like this, like the fashion choices almost kind of made her look like she came from Eastern Europe or something. You know, she was part of a wave of Eastern European immigrants, so you could comment on it as that, you know, as being like, you know, alien in that sense, you know.
Well, her accent was
English, yeah, it was
it?
very posh English. There was all the kind of, you know, obviously there's several kind of feminist angles you could take when discussing it as well, about, you know, a female alien literally devouring men, and kind of taking a righteous blow at the patriarchy, if you want to put it that way.
However, but still kind of being looked after by these shady motorcycle...
Yeah, who she does try to escape, though, and
try
to break free of once she begins to take on recognisably human traits, you know, which coincides with the encounter with the guy with the kind of genetic disorder that leaves his face, I can't remember the name of the disorder now, but that leaves his face kind of misshapen, and that you know, he's the first that she spares, and that's kind of the... There's
a moment where she sees herself in the mirror that is just pivotal and beautiful, and absolutely that's where there's something that she recognises of herself in others, and it's actually, I don't know if you've read the book, but that's in like similar things in the book, but it's very, very different to the book, and I think that's down to Jonathan Glazer's weird, I mean, it's beyond weird vision. I mean, the scenes that Ronnie referred to with the alien love shouldn't really work. But they really do.
They really do, and like, they are really like a black sense of humour through it as well. I mean,
absolutely.
The scene, there's three scenes with that goo. There's the first one that lets you see kind of how it functions with the first guy that she picks up, who I think confused a lot of people not from Glasgow with the fact that he is a Hib supporter. He has a Hib strip on. A lot of people were like, so is it Glasgow or Edinburgh? You know, I that from people who aren't familiar with the city.
I think sometimes we obsess over these things a bit too much in general, but anyway.
The second one is Paul Brannigan, who's in the Angels Share, Ken Loach film, and he's dancing as he goes down because he meets her in a club. And the third one is the guy we were talking about with the kind of the facial the genetic condition that she ends up sparing. So yeah, no, but there's a really dark sense of humour going through it. But no, it got even better for me in a rewatch. I think the first time you watch it is so kind of dizzying, because I don't know, like, I think expectations for it, the way it was kind of promoted, I think I heard the word Kubrickian thrown about a lot, and I think I expected it to be even more stylised than it was. You know, like the opening scenes are this very kind of end of 2001, you know, very quick clinical. There's the kind of the white space that it kind of opens in where she takes the clothes of the dead woman and kind of the personality, and, you know, there's that long opening close up where it's like a dot in the middle of the screen that eventually becomes an eye, and you know, that's very stylized, but a lot of it is so much is done with hidden cameras that it doesn't get to have that degree of stylization to it, you know, so it's much more kind of rough and ready. The
kind of opposing between the realism of the streets, and it was kind of sold as everyone she meets doesn't know that it's her, which isn't quite true. I mean, you know, obviously, but there is a bit of that going on, and I like the fact you're never quite sure who is it, but apart from the people that you know. Yeah,
well, because that makes it so much more jarring when she finally does take someone to the black goo, because so far up to that point it has just been guys that she's been passing by on the street, and so there's no indication when it first happens that the first guy she takes back and kills it is an actor, and so there's that kind of that slight disconnect of you're like, was he in on this? Was this, you know, and then obviously he was once it gets to the point where like special effects would have had to take over. But it's really cool how it's done, and it almost functions. But that said, like, it's so outlandish, but it does almost function as a documentary as well, just because it captures Glasgow at a specific time and place. You know, I mean, you can identify the time that happens. There's posters up for gigs and stuff. I remember either going to or like thinking about going to or getting tickets for, you know, and so you can pinpoint the exact couple of months that it happened in Glasgow, that, you know, that it was filmed,
and the you know, you talk about it kind of disorientating, and that's everything about it. The music, the kind of opening scenes where you're thinking, what am I looking?
Michael Levy music from Mikachu and the Shapes is amazing. It's one of the best soundtracks of the year.
It's one of the most complete films in that sense that I saw this year and that I'd seen in some time, and you know, everyone in it. You know, Ronnie, I think, said it was just one set piece after another, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. I suppose you could say that, but then you can say that about a lot of films, I think.
I think it coheres a lot better with the second viewing, as I say. I think I don't know a lot more out of it on a rewatch, but certainly it went even higher in my estimations after a rewatch, because, as I say, you're so kind of dazzled by it the first time round, or so kind of disorientated by it, not sure what's going on, not sure where it's going, and knowing where it ultimately ends up, and knowing that moment, like with the mirror in particular, is the kind of the pivotal moment and the change, and being able to see, you know, what happens after that point and what happens before, and the move from like city to country, and you know,
and it's a series of relationships, a series of meetings. Perhaps that's the best way of doing it. I mean, at the beginning, when that fantastic scene where she's coming down into, I think it's St Enoch's, but certainly it's down escalators.
Buchanan Galleries,
Buchanan Galleries,
yeah.
And you know, it just. They're looking around, and there's just all these unfamiliar faces going, and then this series of meetings picking up and her getting bolder, and then, you know, as you say, having these kind of connections and actually trying to escape, and it still relies on meetings. So that's the kind of episodic thing, but she just couldn't do it on her own, because she's actually, her function is this fairly basic animal function.
Yeah, and Scarlett Johansson's incredible in it, like absolutely incredible. I think she's like just on broader beyond Under the Skin, I think Scarlett Johansson is my favourite movie star of the year. She's done such amazing work this year in such a kind of variety of different things. I mean, she's incredible in this. She's does great voice work in Her, the Spike Jonze film. Well, as I say, it's a voice.
She's become a really good alien.
Yeah. She's also in Luc Besson's Lucy, which is one of my favourite kind of. I don't know if it's a blockbuster. It's a bit too weird to be a blockbuster, and a little bit kind of too. I don't think it made the money of a blockbuster, but I think it's too weird to be accurately described as that by itself. But she's great in that as well, as a kind of a slightly different kind of superhero.
And good to see Luc Besson, I think, back doing stuff.
Totally. It's his best film in about 20 years, I think. It's not necessarily a universally held opinion, but I had a lot of fun with it.
You're not here for universal.
Well, exactly. But it's really been a hell of a year for Scarlett Johansson. I think she's been terrific, and she's one of those. I think this is a year that she's become one of those people that I will probably go see a film now just because she's in it. She's reached that level, you know, where you trust someone's judgment in the projects that they take on. They've reached a certain point where you're like
the Bill Murray moment. Yeah. Did you think that there was, you know, you talked about Stanley Kubrick comparisons, but what about Man Who Fell to Earth comparisons?
I think that's much more accurate than the Kubrick comparisons. I didn't really see the Kubrick comparisons as much as I think beyond that opening sequence I didn't really see much Kubrick in it at all. I think Man Who Fell to Earth certainly
similar themes,
no, they dealt with in a slightly different way than Man Who Fell to Earth. I think Man Who Fell to Earth is much more stylized and much more oblique, actually. I think for all his kind of its initial difficulty, I think Under the Skin's a lot more accessible than Man Who Fell to Earth. And
in Man Who Fell to Earth, I suppose, to doubt that Bowie's the alien, whereas in this, as I say, it's everyone else.
Yeah, but equally, I think equally iconic as a look to Bowie, and that with her in her black wig and her leopard skin print and everything else. You know, they're both really striking looking aliens.
Well, it was, you know, if we are to talk about such a thing, it was my film of the year, I think. Absolutely. Now, so let's talk about God Help the Girl.
Yeah.
It is a musical.
It is a musical, yeah.
And it's set in the West End of Glasgow. It's Stuart Murdoch's debut. It's much talked about for years and years. I think the album came out 5
years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
2009.
And it's great. I mean, it's a great collection of songs, I think. For me, God Help the Girl looked amazing. And like you said, it showed a part of Glasgow that often is not seen on film. There were problems I had with it. I think I've mentioned elsewhere the scene where they're canoeing down the canal or down the river, and the kind of things are thrown at them by generic Neds on the bank, and there's a mention of, you know, this is a city full of Neds, it's run by Neds, and, you know, we only are allowed to live here. And I thought that was blunt's the wrong word. I think it was just poorly conceived.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's an argument to be made there that's not necessarily an opinion that Murdoch shares. I think that canoe ride, they also, I mean, it comes out of the mouth of oh god, what's his name? Ollie
Alexander's character. But do you not think that's the closest character to Murdoch?
Maybe, but I think he's also the one that he's also the one that they take the piss out of most regularly. Like Down the Girl, they talk about, like, because he has that bit as well on that same canoe trip about being like, I know more about Scotland than most of the people who, and you know, they talk about where were you born? It's like, well, I was born in England. He's got a really plummy English accent. It's like, but my parents are Scottish, you know. It's like, or no, it's like I was born here. Yeah, but when did you move away? It's like, well, 6 months later.
If he was satirising the three of them, then I think that's something I did.
I think there is a degree of distance from the three of them. I don't think it's a completely uncritical look at that kind of lifestyle. I think there is some kind of awareness of the disconnect and the fantasising and the trying to make Glasgow a playground. Because
I think that's something that Murdoch's been accused of before, is kind of having his cake and eat it.
Yeah.
Like enjoying the support of fans, but actually something not even gently taking the piss out of them as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. I think like when he writes songs, I think this is something that like there are very few songwriters that people actually accept this from. I think that they are writing characters in songs. A lot of people just mistake songs as being like intimate confessions or something. Everything's written from the point of view of the singer,
yeah, of course.
And I think Murdoch gets away with it quite often because he writes from the point of view of women and clearly writes from the point of view of women. So that's something that indicates, oh, this isn't about me. And I don't know. I suppose quite often there's that argument made with film as well. You know, I think there were a lot of. I mean, we were talking about this just last week. The Wolf of Wall Street. There were a lot of arguments going around that Scorsese was condoning the character's behaviour because he didn't explicitly condemn it in the film. You know, and you get that a lot. There was the whole Zero Dark 30 thing a couple of years ago where people were arguing about whether or not it endorsed torture. You know, so there's a lot of time with film, a tendency to think that just because activity is presented on screen and it's not explicitly condemned, you know, nobody comes on screen and says you're wrong for doing this, you're wrong for thinking this or saying this, that is endorsed by his creator. But I don't know that that's the case. I think there's enough gentle piss ripping of the characters in God Help the Girl by each other, you know, just as kind of back and forth kind of banter.
Yeah, there's good. The banter, the relationship with the characters, I think works really well.
Yeah,
I think the music works really well. Then, you know, I am a musical apologist.
Yeah,
I noticed in your podcast you said he makes the GUU look like a nice place to be, which is impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, from that hotbed of misogyny.
Exactly, it's hideous. Yeah, but so I think that achievement in and of itself, you know, is worthy of some very high accolades, because that's one of the high points of the film. The musical number set in the GUU, I'll Have to Dance with Cassie, is great. But yeah, no, I thought I'm not saying it's completely flawless, but its virtues outweighed its flaws for me.
And I think even some of its, what some people would call its flaws, like, I mean, it openly, I think, pays homage to various films. You know, there's some dance sequences which are definitely kind of ripped off from elsewhere. But that's no bad thing. I think that's not a problem in this, because it's just a kind of it's a celebration of music, and it's a celebration of his influences, and that's what a lot of his music is, a celebration of his influences.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like I said that on my own podcast as well, it's you know, people can call him out for saying, oh, he's just openly flaunting his influence, and it's like, well, yeah, but I like all those influences too. You know, I love, like,
that's what I agree.
I love the French New Wave. I love Jacques Demy. I love, you know, like Richard Lester, and like, you know, all the early kind of 60s British, you know, new wave of films with Albert Finney and Tom Courtenay and stuff that he's clearly paying homage to as well. You know, so it's right in my wheelhouse. You know, it's everything that he was referencing, that is something that I also enjoy. And
do you think there's a problem from writing songs? This might be fine, but now when you make movies, and I suppose it's not quite a fair comparison, but I'll make it anyway, that he does seem to fetishise teenage or early young women in it.
I mean, I don't know if fetishize is the right word. I think he's fascinated with that period of life. I think that is
because that's what he kind of remembers fondly, or
yeah. I think it's just because it's quite a fertile time for, you know, for drama, because everything's heightened. You know, everything's melodramatic at that point. Especially, I think with with young women. I think like, you know, young women in particular are you know, especially open at that stage, and like, I think guys tend to kind of, you know, bunch it up a little bit more and not really, you know, be as you know, forthcoming. But when you have, like, you know, a group like he has in God Help the Girl, he's able to, you know, it feels more natural from the burst into song, I think, because everything's quite heightened anyway. The emotions are heightened to begin with anyway, and every tiny drama seems like something that can consume the world, you know. And so I think it makes sense from that point of view for a musical, and I think it makes sense for the kind of music he writes too. I mean, I actually really enjoyed it as well. There are some things which didn't sit really well with me, and also I've talked to other people about it who really didn't like it. Yeah. And actually, you know, who you would think some of them you would have thought really would have, and I think there were, but I wonder if that is just a general feeling about
Stuart Murdoch making movies instead of making... I'd like to see what he does next. I
think there's a degree of cultural cringe to the way it's been received in Scotland. I think like a lot of, not necessarily like just reviews I've read, but reactions I've had from friends, reactions I've seen on Twitter, and other kind of negative reactions to it. I think there's a certain degree of like just projecting your own dislike of like the kind of people that it portrays. That kind of student-y West End type onto the characters, and I think it's like that's part of Glasgow life, and it's
certainly part of Belle and Sebastian life. I don't know why you would go and see this film if you didn't.
Well, exactly, yeah, but it's as much a part of Glasgow as anything that's in like any kind of Ken Loach film or indeed Under the Skin, and I think so. Yeah, it deserves to be documented, and whether or not you like. And
as I said, go back thing. It looks beautiful. It's absolutely stunning.
Well, yeah, just that opening sequence, like seeing Emily Browning kind of dance her way through Central Station and Buchanan Street and the Necropolis, like that, I was immediately on board with it.
Yeah.
It would have taken a lot, a lot to make me dislike it after that point. I mean, as I say, I can recognise that, that it's not the most propulsively plot-driven film, is that the characters are quite thin in places, but I think the performances carry it, the songs carry it, the songs are great. As I say, I'm always...
A lot of the films that he does reference are not plot driven either.
Well, exactly.
They are about set pieces.
I mean, I've said this before as well, but I think that if this had been some kind of lost film from the French New Wave that was rediscovered, that it been made in the 60s in Paris, I think people would be falling over themselves to praise it. It's not perfect, but there's a lot of ambition and a lot of heart about it, and I think it just pulls off enough of what it sets out to do to be absolutely worth your time. Especially, I mean, your tolerance and your mileage may vary for it, but I think if you're a fan of Belle and Sebastian, then it's certainly... If you're not a fan of Belle and Sebastian, I can't recommend checking it out.
No, exactly. I absolutely.
But
I think we broadly agree on that, with maybe just varying levels of...
Yeah.
So Ronnie mentioned To Scotland with Love, the King Creosote. Have you seen it?
I haven't actually seen From Scotland with Love. I managed to miss it.
What I say, I mean, it's a compilation of archive footage. It was on the BBC, I think, for an hour, but you can buy it on DVD. It's a longer version, and it goes with the soundtrack and the imagery work beautifully as a kind of sepia-tinted history of Scotland in the last century, and I kind of highly recommend it. But since you didn't see that, what else would you like to talk about?
Well, I don't know, it was a really front-loaded year for film this year. I think I was looking at my top 10, 8 of the 10 films were released in the first month of the year. First 3 months of the year, sorry, the first month of the year. So a lot of it, and half of those were spillovers from 2013, kind of awards season that would have been released in America at the tail end of last year. But I think my absolute favourite film of the year was probably Grand Budapest Hotel, the Wes Anderson film, which I think is one of his very best, and certainly broadened his scope a little bit and maybe brought in... I mean, I'm a massive Wes Anderson fan anyway, and I will defend him against all accusations of being insular.
I've been in your company when you've done that, actually.
Yeah. Too aestheticised and too insular and too much caught up in his own little world. I think there are degrees of emotion and degrees of darkness to Wes Anderson that tend to get overlooked. People kind of are distracted by the picture book visuals and miss a lot of what's going on underneath it. But there's a lot of kind of real pain and a lot of raw emotion, I think, underneath a lot of those surfaces in Wes Anderson films. And I think this was certainly one of the darkest, despite its kind of candy-coloured exterior, certainly one of the darkest films he's made to date, which is about it's really his kind of reaction to the onset of the Second World War in Europe, and the kind of the dark forces kind of bubbling under the surface of the interwar period, underneath that kind of idealized Europe between the wars kind of image. And it's very affecting, but it's also a total riot. Ralph Fiennes is another, with Scarlett Johansson, and I think one of the defining performances of the year in it. He's absolutely extraordinary in it. The support cast is incredible. It looks tremendous. It's a great kind of comedy romp, if you like, through various fictional Eastern European locations. That's one of my favourites of the year. The other obvious one is Richard Linklater's Boyhood, which was a big breakout success that I don't know if a lot of people predicted would take off as well as it did, or even the final product would cohere as well as it did, because obviously it was a massive risk to film a project over the course of 12 years and see how it would turn out. But I think it's another kind of magnificent achievement. other than that, a few others from this year. Under the Skin, we've talked about. The Coen Brothers Inside Llewyn Davis. Again, like Wes Anderson's, I think that's one of their very best. That is very effective. Wolf of Wall Street, I thought was Scorsese's best in about 20 years. I mentioned her already. 12 Years a Slave, I think, is kind of been forgotten about by a lot of people at this point in the year because it came out so early in the year. They think of it as one of last year's one, and because it won Best Picture at the Oscars as well, but it's a really raw, vital, passionate, angry piece of work that I think doesn't deserve to be beaten into the middle brow by his Oscar win and forgotten about. Claire Denis' Bastards I really liked, which is it's been divisive even for fans of hers. Claire Denis is known for Beau Travail, I think, and
I don't know her one
at all. She's a French director, obviously. She made, I think, Beau Travail is probably her most famous film, which is an adaptation of what's the book? I can't remember. It's set in the French Foreign Legion anyway, and Denis Lavant is in it, and anyway, that's not relevant to what Bastards is. Bastards is kind of her take on film noir. It opens with a really startling image of a young woman walking naked down city streets with at night with blood running down the inside of her legs, and kind of takes it from there. And it's bracingly dark, I think is how I would put it. It's really affecting. It's the kind of thing that leaves you a bit shell-shocked when you're done with it. As always with Claire Denis, great soundtrack from the Tinder Sticks. They're long-time collaborators with her.
Oh, that's how I know her name. Yeah. I've got some of the soundtracks. I've not seen the film.
That'll be it. Yeah. But yeah, it was divisive even amongst fans of her work. But it's very much worth seeing if you're in the mood for something dark. Okay. Another returning French great this year, Jean-Luc Godard's latest film, Goodbye to Language, his first in 3D. And made at the age of 83. Is
this recent?
Yeah, this came out. It's gone straight to DVD over here actually, which is baffling for a 3D film. Where 3D is so integral to it. It got a one-off showing at the GFT as part of the French Film Festival just last month, which I was lucky enough to get along to, and it's overwhelming. It's absolutely stunning. With similar to a lot of late period Godard, I'm not entirely sure what it's about or what happens in it, but the visuals are so kind of overwhelming in this one. He makes such good use of 3D and ridiculously low budget means as well. He uses like consumer grade cameras, GoPros and Canons that you just can buy at any electronic shop, and some of the effects that he achieves are incredible, like overlaying images, so you'll have different images in the left and right eye, so you can have both eyes open and see them overlap, or you can close one eye and then the other and kind of edit them back and forth yourself. I'm doing the closing the eye thing, obviously nobody can see this because it's a podcast.
It's very impressive.
Very impressive. Yeah, I was doing the eye since myself. And the other one I'll put in a shout for, because I think it's one that a lot of people could also dismiss as a joke, but is actually very, very good, is Lars von Trier's Sexual Odyssey, Nymphomaniac.
So I didn't get round to seeing that.
It's tremendous. I mean,
I couldn't bring myself to go into Falkirk and say, can I have Nymphomaniac?
No, exactly. Yeah, you'd have to ask. They'd keep it behind the counter, obviously wrapped in black plastic.
Okay. And it also had Shia LaBeouf in it, didn't it?
It did have Shia LaBeouf in it, who's bearable, which is about the best thing I can say for Shia LaBeouf.
He's not one of your actors of the...
Not really, no. I mean, there are a few performances in that. Charlotte Gainsbourg, excellent, is amazing. Uma Thurman steals it, walks away with it, supporting actress of the year. She has one scene and she kills it. But yeah, no, I saw the double bill. They did a one-off double bill screening of it in advance of its general release. So saw both volumes back to back, the full 5.5 hours of it, or however long it was. First volume was actually fairly light. It's a bit of a romp, would be too strong a word, but it's actually
as close as Von Trier.
It's fairly light. It's fairly funny. The real darkness comes in the second volume when it starts to get into some S&M and that kind of stuff, and some very uncomfortable scenes with Jamie Bell and a few other notable things that I won't spoil. But yeah, no.
Well, you just don't want to talk about it. I know we're explicit, but for goodness sake.
But yeah, no. The cast is great in that. Again, you have like Stellan Skarsgård's in it. Willem Dafoe's in it.
I saw the facial posters for one of a better one.
No, it lives up to that. I mean, I people might know from previous podcasts I'm firmly on board with Von Trier anyway, so I think this is probably a a similar thing to God Help the Girl and Wes Anderson. It's like, you're not already on board. I don't think this is going to convert you. But
I'd say Lars von Trier doing God Help the Girl is going very different.
Well, he tried that already and ended up making Dancer in the Dark, which did go very different. Nobody was hung at the end of God Help the Girl. More's the pity, some might say. But in Nymphomaniac, it's almost like the Von Trier megamix. It's everything that like Von Trier does well in one film. It
tick the Von Trierisms.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. But it's not just a retread of his past work either. I think it rounds off his past couple. It rounds off Antichrist and Melancholia very well. His trilogy of depression, if you want to call it that. It's a startling piece of work. I can recommend. I think
Trilogy of Depression was a Cradle of Filth album.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things. Did you see Starred Up?
I did, yeah. I like Starred Up a lot.
So let's talk a little bit about Starred Up. Starred Up was David Mackenzie. We've spoken about Mackenzie before, and I'm a big fan of his. I think maybe you not quite as much.
So. I like him fine, but I think, I thought this was maybe his strongest piece of work. I really liked Starred Up. I thought it was... it's the kind of thing that has been done before, obviously
Scum,
like young guy making his way up from Borstal to full-grown prison for the first time. But I thought the performances were excellent. I thought there was a real kind of energy to it and a real kind of tension to it.
You should say the setup is, for people who haven't seen it, it's set in a prison. This young guy, Jack O'Connell, who's becoming a bit of a star.
Yeah, he's excellent in it. I mean, he looks like a coiled spring in it.
It's terrifying to see that on screen where you think you can feel it's like Ray Winston in Scum. You think, God, this guy could explode at any moment. And it's such a physical performance.
Yeah.
And he's too young to be there, but he's too nuts to be anywhere else.
Yeah.
So they kind of put him into this thing. And it's almost, I presume, deliberately quite stagey. Because it's set, there's 3 levels of the prison. He's in the bottom level. Turns out his dad, played equally amazingly by Ben Mendelsohn, who now there's an actor I would go and see him in anything.
He's incredible.
It's at the top, and it turns out he's in a relationship with another one of the prisoners, and O'Connell's character has just got this anger that he doesn't know how to deal with, and there's not much more to it than that. Just how he manages to, even at the end, you're not sure anything's really resolved.
Yeah.
But it's about institutionalised violence. It's also about how you break people out of that. It could have been very worthy. It manages to avoid that, I think.
It's very compelling. Like, it's got a real energy to it that I think avoids any of that kind of sermonising or moralising. It kind of presents things in a fairly uncomplicated manner and just lets you take what you will from it. I thought it was maybe Mackenzie's best, certainly his best since Howlin' Full.
I think it might be his best. I really do. I think he certainly gets. He always gets really good performances out of his actors, but here he gets just, astonishing performances. I don't know whether that's down to them, because as I say, Ben Mendelsohn, is amazing in anything. Maybe apart from early Neighbours or whatever he was in back then. But and Jack O'Connell, who's now looks as though his star is definitely on the rise. And who was in, I don't know if you ever saw Eden Lake.
I did see Eden Lake, where he terrorised Michael Fassbender.
He terrorises Michael Fassbender, and it takes someone, as a teenager, and it takes someone to do that. I think it was a great film, and really different again, a bit like Under the Skin for different reasons. Not the easiest of watches, but well worth seeing and checking out. Something which I haven't yet seen is Edwyn Collins' The Possibilities Are Endless.
I haven't either.
I have it on order for my Christmas, so we'll maybe review that sometime next year. But I'm looking forward to that. It's a documentary about Edwyn Collins' life at the moment, and apparently it's fantastic. And just one mention for a couple of things that came out on DVD this year, which I hadn't seen. One was For Those in Peril. Have you seen For Those in Peril?
I haven't seen For Those in Peril. I've heard very good things about it.
It's fantastic. Very kind of magical realist, set up in the north of Scotland in a fishing community. 2 brothers, one dies and the other can't deal with it. And anyway, it's really worth checking out. The Sonny Flesh of Man.
With new Tom Weir, David Heyman.
David Heyman plays Cannibal in the... Don't know whether he is Sonny Bean or whether he is in the line, in the kind of line. But if you like any kind of horror, proper old school, scary, not quiet loud, but really guts and gore and that kind of stuff. A bit like early Peter Jackson or that kind of thing. You can't take it too seriously. It was perfect for that.
Okay.
Really good fun. I thought it was great. There was a reissue of That Sinking Feeling that finally got the kind of version it deserved.
The BFI treatment.
Yeah, the proper BFI treatment, so you no longer had to have terrible dubbed versions on it. And just closing, we were talking about the We Love Gregory's Girl documentary that's trying to get funded at the moment, and I think that would be worthwhile looking up and helping out if you can.
Ooh, one more thing that I
just remembered. One more thing. He has been coaching Colombo, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But before I go, well, let me put on my raincoat and talk about, it's not a strictly film, but the one-off screening at the GFT of Your Cheating Heart, John Byrne's Your Cheating Heart.
Oh, yes, which
Ali unfortunately had to miss. But they showed all 6 hours or whatever it is of Your Cheating Heart over the course of a Sunday afternoon at the end of August, and it was tremendous. I'd never seen it because it's still completely unavailable on DVD because I think rights to the music or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
But which is what kept Tutti Frutti off DVD for so long. But I really hope that it eventually makes its way out there because it deserves a far bigger audience than it presumably has managed to find in its years languishing in the BBC vault. It's
fantastic. It's some great country music in it. It's got early performances from Frank Fraser Boyle, that's the character's name.
John Gordon Sinclair's in it.
Eddie Tilda Swinton's in it.
Tilda Swinton, yeah.
Eddie Reader, Katie Murphy.
Richard Jobson turns up as an Italian gangster.
Richard Jobson turns up fantastic in it. There's a character called Tamara McCaskill, which is lots of proper country western stars are in it. It's just fantastic. It's a fantastic 6 hours, and hopefully it will eventually be put out.
It's almost too ambitious. I think it almost trips itself up in the final episode because there's so many plot threads that it has left to resolve. That it has a lot of plot to get through. It has got a lot.
The final episode does fall apart a bit. I think there's no doubt about that.
I think even more ambitious than Tutti Frutti. Tutti Frutti seems positively small scale compared to I think some of the stuff that he tries to pull off in Your Cheating Heart. It's certainly my favourite film noir western musical set in Glasgow.
Absolutely.
Of the 80s.
Of the late
80s, early 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Ken Stott was who I was trying to remember. Ken Stott is in it as a fishmonger stroke drug dealer.
Yes.
And he is brilliant. I think we'll take a little break here and grab a bottle of beer or whatever, and we'll be back with you talking about books in just a minute. Cheers. Back again, everyone. We're going to talk books in this section of what's shaping up to be a rather mammoth podcast. Just even in the break there, the three of us were talking about Under the Skin, which we could have recorded, but we've done that. I'm going to start talking about some non-fiction books that came out this year, some of which we spoke to the people involved on our earlier podcasts. One was 21 Revolutions, which was put together by the Glasgow Women's Library out in Bridgeton, I forgot there, who we spoke to Adele from there and who was one of our best podcasts. I think it was fantastic. And it's a collection of art and essays and fiction and poetry with a fantastic cover which makes it look like, never mind the bollocks. It's got a real anyway, it's a fantastic collection which you should really check out, and you should check out the library as well because it's got a fantastic collection of books and other artefacts. Another podcast guest was Peter Ross, who came on to talk about his collection of call them essays, columns maybe, from that he'd written over the past few years, called Donderlust, which is a great name. And Peter talked to us about the little snippets of Scottish life that are not easily recognised or are often hidden, whether it's S&N clubs or gay pubs or geese
migrating geese,
or murmuration or all sorts of things. It's a terrific read for anyone. Other musical non-fiction books, there was Zoe Howe's Barbed Wire Kisses, which was a biography of the Jesus and Mary chain, which I can highly recommend. She did that great thing of not making, there was a nice balance between reported anecdotes from people who were there at the time and stuff which she'd obviously researched, and it never jarred the two. That she kind of really did it all together. She's just done another biography of Stevie Nicks, which I really quite fancy because I'm fascinated by Stevie Nicks.
Yeah,
I'm kind of fascinated by Fleetwood Mac in general. Going right back to the Peter Green days and all that, they're a phenomenon. It shouldn't work. Nothing about Fleetwood Mac should work.
They're all fucking mental.
That's why it works. That's why it works.
All of them.
I think that's it. It's kind of upper class English and kind of Californian, royalty almost coming together and weirdly working. Anyway, that's for a different conversation. But anyway, I highly recommend the Jesus and Mary Chain book, Barbed Wire Kisses. One of my highlights of the year was being able to interview Viv Albertine about her book Close, 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 Music, Boys, 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 which I don't think is a great title, but the book's fantastic. Viv Albertine, once off the Slits, now got some solo stuff out. Anyway, that was just personally a joy to be able to speak to her. And Simon Reynolds, I think it's Simon Reynolds, had a book out, Simply Thrilled, which is his kind of look at postcard records. A lot of postcard record stuff this year with the film, the Edwin Collins film, and new album from Edwin Collins, and later going to talk about Roddy Frame. But it's a good read too. And then there was that thing called the referendum, and there was a whole spate of books that went out around that.
Just a few.
Just a few. I'll just mention a couple of them. One, which was really quite different, was Arts of Independence by Alan Rioch and Sandy Moffat, which looked at the kind of artistic argument for an independent Scotland, which is one that wasn't often made. Another interesting one was Born Under a Union Flag, which was edited by Alan Bissett and Alistair MacKillop, and it was asking fans of Glasgow Rangers what they felt about the possibility of an independent Scotland and the referendum, and it was such an odd concept that it really worked because it asked things and got answers that you wouldn't get from anyone else, and arguments that you wouldn't get, and people going, I don't know what my identity is anymore. So that was, there was lots of other great ones, of course, but they were two which caught my eye. Yourself, Chris, what were you reading?
Well, as we've established on previous year-end podcasts, I am absolutely terrible at keeping up with contemporary books that are published, reading books.
As we've established, you've just finished Waverley.
Yeah, I've just finished Waverley. It took me 200 years. The closest I came this year, a title that was actually published this year, is one that I'm still kind of working my way through because I actually bought a copy for my brother for Christmas, but I accidentally ordered two and then decided just to keep the second one instead of sending it back because it came and it looked so good that I couldn't return it. It's a graphic novel by Ed Piskor, who's a young American cartoonist, I believe in his early 30s, called Hip Hop Family Tree, which sets out to do nothing less than chronicle the entire history of hip hop from the 70s to the present day. It's an ongoing project.
Is it anything? There was Rock Family Trees for a while.
It's not affiliated with the BBC or anything like that.
No.
I think it started as a webcomic on Boing Boing, possibly, and it's now been collected into these gorgeous books by Fantagraphics, who are the publishers of, or at least came up with the concept for my beloved Complete Peanuts collections, which come out on an annual basis. But yeah, no, it's great. The first two volumes are out so far. I think the second volume came out this year. The first volume came out last year. He is just putting the finishing touches to the third to come out next year. The first two volumes only reached 1983. So it's quite exhaustive. The first spans the mid-70s to, I believe, 1980, and the second is 81 to 83, but it's the real kind of, the formation of the sound, so Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, the real early days, the real kind of early pioneers, Fab Five Freddy. It's great as well. I think graphic novel is actually a really good way of approaching hip-hop because it emphasises that it's not just about the music, it's the visual culture as well, so you can bring in like Fab Five Freddy and his connection to Basquiat and stuff like that, and the kind of the artistic side of it. And it's really kind of dizzy in the way it lays it out, because
it's a graphic novel. I mean, it's a kind of style of it. What does
it's done in the kind of like faded colours, and like the paper's kind of brown, so it looks like, I think the way I've seen it described is like the kind of colour schemes of Marvel comics from the 70s, so contemporaneously, and I don't know if he's going to change the style and clean up as it goes along to reflect the style of comics as they evolved, but it's really cool. Just the way it lays it out, it'll be like page-long stories at a time, and then the characters kind of intersect and come together, so, they'll all have their own different areas of New York, depending on the boroughs that are in, and then, characters start to interact. He'll occasionally insert panels of future hip hop stars maybe listening in on the radio at home. So there'll be cameos from like Dr. Dre as a kid, being told to turn that racket down or whatever.
Yeah.
There's segments where like Blondie's introduction to the scene, where they Chris Stein and Debbie Harry are first taken by Fab Five ready to see Grandmaster Flash, and so they're standing in the crowd going, "Flash is fast, Flash is cool." All this kind of stuff. So it's really cool. It's really well done, and it's a pretty exhilarating read. I can heartily recommend it if you're into hip hop at all, or indeed graphic novels. It's really well done. Ed Piskor is the guy's name. It's very much worth checking out. Other than that,
there'll be a couple of volumes before he reaches Ice and Hammer.
Quite a few. That'll be I expect that'll be a whole volume in itself. The lore is so rich in the great Ice, Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer Wars, as they were known. They were. As we all wore those T-shirts. I survived the MC Hammer Vanilla Ice
Team
Wars.
Vanilla.
Please Hammer, don't hurt them.
Exactly.
Other notable things from this year. I finally read Lolita this year. I've never read Lolita.
It's magical.
It's incredible.
Well, that's the wrong term for it, but it's an incredible book.
It's dizzying.
What you were talking about earlier with regards to Stuart Murdoch songs or film, or what people often do, and they forget this is fiction. They think, well, this must be. I mean, Lolita's almost the prime example of that.
Yeah.
And I know from talking to someone who teaches the book, has had students come up and go, well, this guy's a paedophile. So it's a writer. It's a character in a book. And, but it's one of my favourite books. It's astonishing.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and just almost just as like an aesthetic experience, not necessarily, leaving aside, kind of the thematic implications, the moral aspects of it, if you like, or any other consideration. Just the verbal texture, his use of language is incredible for someone whose first language wasn't even English. Nabokov's use of language is utterly extraordinary in it, and it
always makes me think of the time when in The Simpsons, when the Germans got to take over, and it goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Simpson, my use of English is ineloquent or inelegant," and there's a bit of that about it's such an elegant, because he's had to think closely about nearly every word, more so than perhaps someone who's English.
Absolutely, and it's also hilarious.
Yes,
I think that's something I was not prepared for, was how funny Lolita is. It's really funny. So that, and I think I've been doing the past couple of years, I've been on an effort to reread a couple of Kelman books a year, just to try and because it's been like about a decade since I first read all of them, and see if they've changed and my relationship with them has changed. So I read them, a couple of key points in this year. First, I read A Disaffection round about my birthday this year, which was
thing to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely, because A Disaffection, the protagonist in that is I believe 29. I think he is. I turned 28 in May this year, so I'm much closer in age to him than I was when I first read it about 10 years ago, and it really it had the kind of impact on me this time around that maybe reading The Crow Road did when I was that age, when I was about 19, 20. In that this is frighteningly accurate. This is frighteningly
I always think of it as the person that Kelman feared he would be.
That fear of hitting this age and being afraid of stagnating and and not really knowing where to go next or what to do next. That kind of drift of I'm done with uni, I've been in a job for a few years, what happens now? That kind of thing.
And that scene where he's washing the dishes with his dad, and there's this kind of lack of communication between the two. Because again, talking about aliens, he's the alienated one from his family, because he's now educated and
so there's that, and then around about the referendum, I reread How Late It Was, How Late, because the kind of the brouhaha that sprang up around it winning the Booker weighed very heavily on my mind, with a lot of the arguments that came up around about the referendum of Scottish culture being seen as somehow inferior to dominant British culture or something, or it not being part of an acceptable part of British culture because it's written in Scots and because there's no concessions made to necessarily an English audience, and all of that. And I mean, it's still such a thrilling, vital piece of work, and I think a landmark in Scottish literature as well.
And I think European literature.
Absolutely, that's the thing. Kelman's so not parochial, he's definitely a world author. I mean, what was the international Booker he was nominated for a few years ago for Kieran Smith Boy, and he really belongs in that kind of grouping. I think he's a major international author, and
I think sometimes we perhaps, again, might be a cultural cringe thing, it might be just familiarity breeding contempt, but sometimes we take him maybe not for granted, but there should be a celebration of James Kelvin's work, I think, much more than there is.
Yeah.
There were a few, I'd read a whole bunch of fiction this year, and there was a few well-known writers that came out with some new stuff. Alan Warner's Their Lips Talk of Mischief was kind of like a literary, with Neil and I, set in London, but the two characters who basically want to be successful writers, but kind of alcohol and other things get in the way. I think it was back to being a really fun, read for Alan Warner. I think he's very good at that. Talking of which, Irving Welsh, The Sex Lives of Siamese Twins. Wow. But actually it was a really good, it was one of his American books set in, I think it was set in Florida, I think. Anyway, I never quite think he gets that as well as he does when he's in Edinburgh. But this was fine. That's really damning with faint praise. He would hate that, but it wasn't one of his best books. It certainly didn't live up to Skag Boys, but it's a good, if you like Irving Welsh, you probably read it anyway. Louise Welsh, a new novel, the first part of a trilogy, A Lovely Way to Burn, which I can highly recommend. Doug Johnson, Deadbeat, not quite as good as Gone Again, I would say, which is the previous one, but still very recognisable. Doug Johnson, quick, great soundtrack to it. There's a great thing where he goes back and finds one of the characters finds kind of diary entries about gigs that her parents had met and been to, and it's some of the best, most famous Scottish gigs in the 90s, in Nirvana and Edinburgh and Teenage Fan Club at the Barras and all that kind of thing. Dilys Rose's Pelmanism was a very fine book, and some of the one of the best, which I'll talk about, and again he was a podcast guest, was Ron Buckland's Ghost Moon. I bound to no one in my admiration for Ron Buckland, and this is just heartbreaking, but again never overly sentimental, about growing old and memory and family and struggle and society's expectations. A young woman pregnant who doesn't know the father in the 40s in Presbyterian Edinburgh, is not an easy life ahead, but he manages to create this kind of magical, heroic character of Maggie who grows through it. Another great Scottish writer, Ali Smith's How to Be Both, was my book of the year, for having such a thing, as I keep saying. And I think, we often overly play this idea of dualism in Scotland. I think you'll agree, the Jekyll and Hyde and all that stuff.
Caledonian antithesis.
I wasn't going to mention that. But I also think we now sometimes overplaying it. And, it's not just Scotland, there's a lot of places where there is a doubling or a split personality or whatever you want to call. Anyway, it's one of the cleverest books you'll ever read. It's just, she's such a craftsperson as a writer. Other books to mention, there was a lot of good, if not newish writers. Nina Delamere, Layla, was a terrific book, came out at the beginning of the year. Choose Side Ties, The Mouse Deer Kingdom. It felt to me like I've totally forgotten the name of the Passage to India. I don't know if you've ever had to read Passage to India.
I've seen the film.
What it did was, it made you kind of uncomfortable in a culture that you weren't quite sure of, and took you there, and there was the heat and the sounds and the things that the people do, and then there was the Western culture kind of forcing its way into that and not really finding a fit. Fantastic short story collections. Annalisa McIntosh's Any Other Mouth and Kirsty Logan's The Rental Heart are both highly recommended, and you can read reviews of them on the website if you're so minded. A.L. Kennedy had a short story collection, All the Rage. James Robertson did a really interesting thing, and I haven't read it yet, but I've got it to read again. 365 stories, which I'm guessing is a story for each day of the year. In fact, I know it is because I have opened it and said. But I always want to read James Robertson stuff. And there was some interesting collections of fiction. Freight published Out There, which is a collection of LGBT writing, which I again thoroughly recommend. There's some amazing stories in there. Again, you've got to be careful that you don't read too much into, it is fiction, but some of the tales that are told are just amazing. Yonder Awa, which was the publication that came out of the Empire Cafe. And we'll talk about the Empire Cafe a little bit later when we talk about our kind of events or things of the year. But there was a collection called Yonder Awa that came with it, which was a small collection. Was it mainly poetry?
Yeah.
Mainly poetry, a couple of essays.
Yeah, but it was beautiful.
Oh yeah, it
really
looked amazing.
Beautifully done as well. It was, and then the selection and the breadth of voice in it was quite something as well. I really liked that little publication. It was,
and
I
it was
remember
free, they gave it away.
Exactly,
Unbelievable.
I remember Louise and Jude remarking at the time that this was given away to people at it, and at the time I thought, that's great, it's a really nice thing to do. Now when I look at that and look back on it, I'm like, man,
it's a keeper. It's really a real keeper of a time and place. I mean,
although it's a giveaway, it's not a throwaway by any stretch.
Exactly. And there's also a new compilation called In the Empty Places, which I just received, which is another great collection. Other things to check out would be Liam Murray Bell's The Busker. New books from writers like Nick Brooks, Ian Maloney. Craig A. Smith's The Mile was interesting because it was one of the few bits of fiction that dealt with the referendum, pre-referendum anyway. And that just because I didn't know if people thought fiction wasn't the right place to deal with something so important, but it was really a really interesting read.
I could see a lot of books about it forthcoming, a lot of fiction forthcoming about it in the next couple of years. I think now that the dust has settled on it, I can see a lot of people picking it as like a time and a place in which to very pointedly set their story.
Possibly.
Some of them.
You think the dust has settled?
Well, you know what I mean. Now the vote itself is out of the way. I think that there'll be a lot of some quite heavy-handed. I imagine there will be quite a few tales of divorce set around it. I imagine there will be quite a few domestic dramas that mirror it in none too subtle ways. But I do think it is a very fruitful.
If it's done well, it could be good. It could be done really badly.
I think there will be a lot of bad, but hopefully also some very good work that comes out of it. Yeah.
So I basically just reeled off a whole load of books that I think you should read, but I thought it was a really good year for Scottish writing in particular, Scottish fiction, I think, and a really nice mix of new writers and Well Kent. But I think we will move on now to music before we're here all night.
Yeah.
And let's start with some live stuff. Chris, what was your kind of live events of the year?
Oh God, well there were a few. I was quite lucky this year. It was that way where because of work and stuff like that, I didn't necessarily get along to that much. I think maybe fewer than 20 gigs throughout the year, but a lot of the ones that I got to were really good. They really made them count. I saw Prince this year, which was incredible.
So nobody can top that. Well, unless you were there, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, it's it was.
You're shaking your head like it seemed like a dream.
It did almost. I mean, I went with my dad. We got with my dad. Me and my brothers split the cost of a ticket for my dad for his birthday this year because. Prince announced it with, I believe, 3 weeks' notice that he he announced it on my birthday, which was nice present this year. And my dad's birthday is 3 weeks after mine, so he played the Hydro the day after my dad's birthday. So my brothers and I pitched in, got him a ticket. Got me a ticket as well, obviously. And I took my dad to see Prince, and it was just the bit that makes me think I might have dreamt it was that I saw my dad dance to Prince, which is just something I never ever thought I would see.
That is the power of Prince.
That is the power of Prince. He is a funky man.
Yeah, but, his name is Prince, and he is funky.
Yeah. But no, it was everything you'd expect from a Prince show. He looks amazing just now. He's got this wee afro thing going on. He was wearing kind of like an all-in-one caftan thing. He's
a kind of alien character.
Absolutely. He played like 2/3 of the songs off of Purple Rain. He played like pretty much everything you'd expect. He played medleys. He at one point was like, "I got so many hits, we could be here all night." His band are really shit hot.
He probably wasn't joking.
Yeah. His band are really shit hot that he has just now, like Third Eye Girl. They're kind of a power trio, they're so quite guitar heavy again.
I think he basically picks the best female musicians he could find and said, "Right, you are now my band."
Exactly, yeah, and nobody's going to turn him down, are they? But it was the first time he played Scotland in a long time, like maybe since the 90s, I think. And it was just incredible seeing him. He played for about 2.5 hours, and it was it's Prince live. I don't really. It's just such a surreal experience being in the room with him. You know, just looking at him. Like even if it's
a hell of a room.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, even if it is the Hydro, and you're like still maybe about 50 feet away from him, just knowing that that's Prince. You know, that's the guy who bestrode the 80s.
He did.
You know,
and the one who survived. You know.
Yeah. He kept going, and is still fairly artistically vital and important, and someone who matters.
I met people that went there who had, you know, it was like a religious experience.
Yeah,
and they were just could not get over it, and days later were still kind of, you know, couldn't get over it, and I'm kicking myself. I never got a ticket. But
well, one that we did go together that I want to mention that was in that same week was Aidan Moffat's one-off thing as part of the Commonwealth Cultural Programme Where You're Meant to Be.
Oh yes, that's right.
At the Barras, which was the Saturday before Prince. It was kind of his take on a traditional ceilidh, which meant just an evening of songs and stories, and not, you know, necessarily a dance. It was great.
It was great.
Like, the atmosphere was incredible.
We're handing out free whiskey still.
We were. I believe you had mine as well.
I did.
Yeah.
So I had a bro time.
But no, the atmosphere was great just from the moment you went in. You know, there was like a table set up. Well, there were a few tables set up around the dance floor of the Barras, and one of them had like a group of fiddlers just fiddling away, and then he brought out a variety of kind of traditional acts who came out. He had
basically toured Scotland and had been filmed touring Scotland, and had along the way, you know, a bit like a kind of Pied Piper, had picked up various singers and musicians that he went, you'll do.
He had like
he brought them all back to the Barras.
He had a teenage girl who sang a couple of traditional ballads unaccompanied, who they'd found at a festival up in the Highlands. He had a couple of kind of I would say Francie and Josie types from Angus, who were the kind of music hall back and forth again, sing traditional songs, but really, all right, Jock, here we go, kind of with like tongue in cheek, every
they were a tongue. What you were saying,
absolutely a turn. But probably a big hit at New Year's in Kerrymuir or wherever it was they were from, and. Sheila Stewart, the Bothy balladeer, who's very famous in traditional circles. I believe I saw her at a Celtic Connections concert I was taken to by my school's music department at some point in the early 2000s. So they all came on, and then Moffat himself came out just wearing shorts. Nothing, no standing on ceremony.
And he's kind of done versions of traditional songs and made some of them properly filthy.
Yeah, well, what he did was it wasn't necessarily like he was covering the old songs. He'd written his own songs in the style of traditional songs for a lot of them. Although he did also updated one, I think it was it a Masonic song? It was one of these kind of like a gentleman's club song that maybe like Burns would have been a part of. And he changed the chorus to, it was a song about an orgy, which he made clear at the start, which is, probably made in Moffat territory. And the chorus, I don't know if it was originally written like this, but certainly in his rendition of the chorus was, who's in you this time, who's up you new.
That's right.
And the verses were all various filthy puns on occupations of whoever may have been.
And the crowd sang along.
Oh, they did. Like the baker put a bun in the oven, that kind of thing. The butcher had a few pounds of meat. All that kind of stuff.
Sounds like proper music hall.
It was proper music hall, but really serious stuff as well. There was stuff about gay marriage. There's a really great song called Jock McGraw, which is about post-traumatic stress and like a soldier being sent off. Has one of the lines of the year. It's about a guy who always aspires to be a soldier, and was like, a young man, it's time to tan the Taliban. It's one of the lines in it, which it's really good. It's really well done. But it was a great night. The atmosphere was great. He had like a Nessie on stage. You had like a lion rampant.
Basically, he turned the Barras into a kind of social club.
Yeah, which is great.
I'm surprised we don't have to stand up and salute the Queen at the end of the night.
Well, given the tone of the night, I don't think that.
No, I know, but from my youth, that often happened in these places.
And a great band around him. He had James Graham from Twilight Sad. He had Jenny Reeve from Strike Colours and Body Parts. Right. Stevie Jones. It was a good band around him as well. So it was a really good night. Other live stuff, Teenage Fan Club at Kelvin Grove Bandstand was you didn't get along.
I didn't get along,
but I was there with friend of the podcast, Ian McDonald. Was along with me at that. That was a great night just to see Kelvin Grove Bandstand refurbished like that. And I think it had been years and years since you're talking maybe like 6 or 7 years since I'd last seen a proper Teenage Fan Club show. I'd seen maybe Norman Blake do a couple of solo sets, or them do. I think they played at the Alex Chilton tribute night down in Monorail a few years ago after he died. But obviously it was a set of like his songs, and it wasn't a proper full on Fanny's experience. But so it was great hearing all those songs again live because it had been a while. But just a few. The other one I would single out as a great live show from this year is also the band responsible for my favourite album of the year, who are Francois and the Atlas Mountains. Have a couple of Scottish connections. They kind of came to attention after they were signed to Fence Collective. And one of their members, now they're obviously, like as you might guess from the name, largely French, but one of their members now is Gerard Black. He used to be in Findo Gask, who were kicking about Glasgow for a few years there, they put on like a really low budget version of like a really stunning pop show, like a lot of, it was almost like if Michel Gondry had art directed like a Justin Timberlake show or something like that. There was choreography, there was interacting with the stage, there was lots of stuff going on, lots of really cool visual elements, just on a very low budget. I think is clear that he's spent a lot of time studying Stop Making Sense and learning a bit of stagecraft from it. It's a really complete pop vision, a really great integration of every visual aspect that you can do with a live show, all the things you can do to just give your audience a good time. And the album Piano Ombre is just a perfect piece of pop. It's
good. It is a good album,
immaculately crafted. And
there's a lot of good pop music this year, I think.
A lot of good pop, yeah.
My kind of on Prince moment, although it's not quite in the same level, but it kind of was for me, was seeing Roddy Frame recently, who now has turned this into almost like an annual Christmas show at the concert hall, which is a wee bit of a shame because it's not perhaps the best venue to see him in. In fact, it's definitely not the best venue to see him in. However, if anyone can spark up a Glasgow crowd of a certain age, then Roddy Frame can do it. And they were a bit weary to begin with, not weary, but a bit tired, I think, and sitting down in the heat. But by the end, you forget, well, I don't forget, but some people forget how many great songs Roddy Frame has done. And his guitar playing, we talk about Prince's guitar playing being unexpected, and it is. When you see him, you kind of forget that he's this amazing guitar player. And it's the same with Roddy. Am I saying Roddy Frame is Scotland's Prince? Probably not. But there's similar skills and skills, similar pop sensibilities, I think, a huge range of influences, and he seems to master most of them. And it was just a fantastic night. Love Roddy Frame, and it's always a pleasure to see him play. He also brought an album called Seven Dials, which he just doesn't make bad records, in my opinion, and this was another great one. Some of it he does a track on it called Postcards. There's a bit of looking back, but not in a kind of sentimental way, in a kind of quite interesting way. I also saw Aidan Moffat play a gig with Aaron Hubbard as part of I Write, which was a good two-hander to see. And going back to the Empire Cafe, Stanley Odd played a short set in the last night, and again it's a kind of theme about people winning round audiences, because the folk were there to hear discussion on Scotland's place in empire and all of that family historical, and then a lot of them had wandered off to the bar, to be perfectly honest, and then Stanley Odd started up playing and really kind of got everyone back into their seats. And I'd like to see him in a different situation, and haven't heard his new stuff yet, apart from the stuff that he released kind of during the referendum. But what are your feelings on Mr. Odd? Hip hop aficionado.
I really like what they're going for, but I don't know. I think the problem with a lot of Scottish hip hop is that it sacrifices kind of the musicality of hip hop, I think, for trying to cram in as many words as they can. I think there are people who do it better than others. Like I think Hector Berserker are actually really good. Who I saw open for De La Soul this year. They really won me over because I'd heard of them, but I hadn't really heard much by them. And on record, they almost veer a bit too much towards reggae at times, in terms of their production. No, I'm fine with reggae. It's just I didn't really think it fit what they were doing that well. But live, there's a real force to them, and a real energy to them. Like they play with a live band.
There seems to be a commerciality. I don't mean that in a bad way at all about Stanley Odd that makes him. He seems to be the one that's kind of garnering the praise. I think with Stanley Odd, the thing is that they're I think that they're kind of almost for people who don't like hip hop.
You know, that kind of thing. It's like, it's almost like, no, but I don't mean that in a kind of they're bad kind of way.
No. I think you're talking about the people who listen rather than them.
Yeah. I'm saying,
that.
like, it's almost for people who are like, okay, these are all the problems I have with hip hop, and Stanley are like, fine, we're not going to do any of that, you know. But I don't know. It becomes a little bit like, it's the kind of thing to me. Stanley is the kind of thing that, like, if they were American, I don't think anyone would pay them any attention, you know, that kind of way. Because I think they just kind of get lost.
But then they don't get paid any attention outside of you know, and that's what all but you know, there are always bands who matter. You know,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, like I like what they're. I like them in theory. It's just in practice, I don't really connect with it as much. I think it's that way. It comes across as quite worthy. I think, like, there's not a lot of fun. I think to a lot of Stanley's stuff, which is a shame. I wish I liked them more than I did.
Okay, well, I'm genuinely interested with that, you know. And I do kind of understand what you mean. I often think that they're the kind of band that would be on the Mercury Music Pride list because they have to have a hip hop actor.
Yeah. Well, they did this year in a Scottish one.
They did. We'll come to talk about them in a moment, I think. Other great live gigs was Lorraine McCauley and the Borderlands, who I just love more and more every time I kind of get to see them or listen to them. The Olive Grove showcase at Celtic Connections right at the beginning of the year was fantastic, and every band that came on was just like, yep, love them, and that's my kind of musical live stuff. Before we go on to albums, where are we in time, Ian? How long will we do this?
1 hour and wait for it, just about there. 16 minutes.
60 minutes. I think we're just going to have another quick break, and we'll be back with you to talk about the recorded music of the year. Hello everyone, we're back for part 3, which is unheard of.
Once more.
And this was supposed to be a brief chat, and you know, it's good that there's been lots of stuff this year, as we can tell, or we just can't shut up. So we're going to talk recorded music of the best stuff of the year. Chris, what was your kind of favourite stuff that you heard all year?
Well, as I mentioned already, I think my favourite album was Francois from the Atlas Mountains. But like last year, I think I kind of had two favourite albums this year. Like last year, not almost exactly like last year. One of them was French pop, and the other one was someone who started off as hip hop and kind of quickly found that they couldn't be constrained by genre because they were too forward looking. Last year it was Kanye West's Yeezus, and this year is You're Dead by Flying Lotus, who I've talked about on here before. I think Until the Quiet Comes by him was my favourite album. 2012, I think I talked about it on here. He's in the lineage of the Coltrane's. He's a great nephew of Alice Coltrane.
Coltrane.
Not Robbie Coltrane. No, unfortunately, no. He was rejected for a role in Tutti Frutti, unfortunately, because he was only 6. But the album You're Dead is a concept album about the moment of death, about the transition to the other side, and it's a big step forward from a couple of ways. It's as I say, he started off kind of making instrumental hip hop, kind of Jay Dilla-ish, I suppose, or Madlib, that kind of, something that's compelling enough to listen to without vocals over the top of it. A lot of the time, because his beats are too tricky for anybody to keep up with.
I think we were talking about Goldie earlier on.
Yeah, exactly. But as he's gone on throughout his career, he's been letting in more of the jazz influence that is a part of his family. I'd say this is his most full on excursion into jazz, I think, today. There's a lot of jazz stuff. Like Herbie Hancock is on it. On one
fantastic
track. There's a lot of it. There are a couple of tracks that sound like kind of In a Silent Way, Bitches Brew era Miles Davis. There's a couple that kind of veer towards hard bop. So there's that. There's the kind of the open embrace of jazz in a lot of places. But this is also the first of his albums that he's actually had people rapping over his beats. Like, he put out a mixtape after his last album as his hip hop alias, Captain Murphy, which is still him doing all the beats, but he raps over it himself. And he had a couple of guests on that. But this is the first actually proper Flying Lotus album that he's had guests on. So he has a great track with Kendrick Lamar, who is one of the most exciting young MCs in America just now. He has Snoop on a track. But yeah, usual kind of wide range of collaborators. Angel Duradourian, who's in the Dirty Projectors, is on it as well. As I say, Herbie Hancock. Thundercat, who's his standby bassist, who is incredible. He's a virtuoso. But yeah, no, it's really.
See, when I hear the words virtuoso bassist, I think
know.
Jaco Pastorius.
It's not quite Jaco Pastorius, but yeah, no, it's a really, really thrilling listen. Yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot to take in. Takes a few listens to fully absorb it, but it's really wonderful.
Herbie Hancock was on a Simple Minds album. Do you know that?
Was he?
He was on New Gold Dream.
Oh,
so there you go.
There you go.
Pop fact fan.
Yeah.
And when we talked about Goldie, it was the Garage Man, not the Blue Peter dog. Craig Armstrong had a new album out. I love Craig Armstrong stuff. Mostly known maybe for soundtrack work. I think that's maybe fair with Baz Luhrmann and various other things. When he makes albums, they're not really coherent wholes. They're not, but they're just fantastic track after fantastic track, and they can move. But there are things which kind of bring it together. Often the people he uses as collaborators. And on his latest album, It's Nearly Tomorrow, he's got James Grant of Love and Money fame, Brett Anderson of Suede, and the best thing I think he's done for a long, long time. Paul Buchanan's on a couple of tracks from the Blue Nile. Jerry Burns, good, should be well known Scottish singer. And what reunites them all are the really strong voices over this often quite sparse music. He knows that often it's about not just the notes, it's the space between, to quote the name of one of his albums, the space between. I've just got that. But that's what he does. It's the space between the notes that really is where he understands.
Was the Simpsons line about that? You have to listen to the notes she's not playing. I can do that at home.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what you need to do with Craig Armstrong. And is it my album of the year? I've listened to a lot, but it's today it probably is. I'll maybe have a different answer tomorrow. I really enjoyed the Vaseline's album.
I enjoyed the Vaseline's album. It's not in my top 10 or anything, but I think it was a very strong kind of comeback from it. It felt like another comeback from it. I almost felt like one description I read of it was that like Sex with an X, their proper comeback album, which is their second album in how many years was that? Was that 21 years after their first album came out? Dum Dum came out in '89, and I think Sex with an X came out in 2010, and it was okay, but it was not without its embarrassing moments. But this one felt.
It felt like they were in the spirit of the Vaselines
groove of early Vaselines, and I think the one, as I say, one description I read of it was that it felt like it felt like it could have come out in like say 94ish if like they'd been signed to a major label after Dum Dum came out and had stayed together and had been given the budget to have higher production values and radio friendly hooks and stuff like that, I think there's really good stuff on it. It does feel much more in the spirit of early Vaselines than Sex with an X did necessarily.
Another album which I thought was fantastic, which is one that kind of Ian recommended, was the amazing Snakeheads Amphetamine Ballads, which is kind of what they were. I mean, you've played with these guys, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, but these guys were intense. But it was proper. It was like watching.
They mean it, man.
Yeah, they do, and it was like a fully formed, I don't know, experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it didn't come off as an act either. It was proper, I suppose, is the only way I could put it. Yeah. Real tension to the music and a sort of real anger and viciousness.
What we're talking about Jack O'Connell and Starred Up, there's a sense that actually things could go very wrong.
Coiled Spring, yeah, absolutely.
And any minute this could go from being a gig to being something completely different altogether.
Yeah, but absolutely fantastic, and I really feel like sort of real serious, genuine, rock and roll band. You know what I mean?
And I think they got that on the record as well, which is very difficult to do. It's one thing doing it live, but I think to get it down on recorded is very difficult. I really enjoyed Honeyblood's album, Honeyblood. I thought it was a kind of nod to Tallulah Gosh, early Primal Scream, even the Vaselines, that kind of thing. Wasn't perfect, it was a little bit rough around the edges. It probably could have been a bit rougher around the edges, but were you... if they're working.
I never heard the album, but I've seen them live a couple of times. I think I saw them open for the Twilight Sad around about this time last year. But yeah, no, it's definitely a sound that appeals to me. You know, that kind of late 80s, early 90s fuzz rock kind of thing is definitely in my wheelhouse, I think. So yeah, no, I'd be interested in checking.
Well, let's talk about Young Fathers, because they won the big Mercury Prize.
In fact, they won the Mercury and the Scottish Album of the Year award
they did?
for 2 different albums.
Yeah, which and personally I think well deserved.
I think so. I think it was a real moment, like a real I don't know if it was just something about the referendum there or something. This is a kind of general excitement about Scotland, but I think it was a really good statement on both of their parts. I think when this was the 3rd year the Scottish Album of the Year award had run. The first 2 albums, each of them involved Aidan Moffat in some capacity, because the first went to Aidan Moffat and Bill Wells for It's Getting Older. The second, oh no, don't get me wrong, they're both great records. The second went to R.M. Hubbard, which had a track featuring Aidan Moffat on it. So to break with that so completely and be like, no, this can also be Scottish music. You know, a group that's one guy from Edinburgh and 2 immigrants from various parts of Africa. And say, no, this is also Scottish music, I thought was a really great statement to make in this year particularly, to be like, no, we can be outward looking and we can be international.
And outside of all that, it was a storming. Both albums are amazing. I mean, I saw them play a live thing at one of Nairiki's gigs, and you know, it reminded me of Asian Dub Foundation, Chicky. I mean, there is that kind of dark, for want of a better term, trip hop feel to the stuff they do.
Quite a lot of TV on the radio in places, but just the fact that they can take influences from all over the place but still be rooted in Scotland and still take, you know, their lyrics and their sound and kind of what they're going for from just the bits and pieces of their daily life and everything around them. I think it was a watershed moment for Scottish music and for a hip hop act to have won. You know,
and I have to say, when we were talking, this sounds really name dropping, but we did do a podcast with Vic Galloway, and when we were talking to him about Young Fathers, he said, you've got to check out Law, who does collaborations with them, and her stuff is fantastic as well. I can highly recommend it. We are talking a podcast, we did one with Alistair Roberts up in Braemar, and he is part of the Furrow Collective, who had a fantastic kind of proper old kind of traditional folk album at our next meeting, but if you like your folk, then it's something you should really check out. And he just can't stop collaborating, it seems to me. You know, he just keeps doing album after album with anyone, not quite anyone that'll ask him. He's a bit more discerning than that, but
always with friends,
almost always with friends, which is nice,
and always good company as well.
He keeps good company, which speaks very well of him, I have to say. I just remembered another album which is up there with one of my albums of the year, which is the Pearl Fishers return with Open Up Your Colouring Book, and that's Davy Scott basically now, I think, with the Pearl Fishers, East Kilbride fella, just kind of beautiful lyrical pop music, really. So some people will find it bordering on the twee, I think. It just it fits my mood a lot of the time. What else have you been listening to?
What else have I been listening to? One of the more unexpected things I think that happened for me musically this year was I've long been a fan of the work of Mark Kozelek through Red House Painters and Sun-Killed Moon.
I love him.
Suddenly he got massive this year. He released his album Benji in February, and it got kind of unprecedented critical attention. He broke through, got a much wider audience.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, Benji's been huge. Like,
that's why I've got my head in Scottish stuff. I've got the album, and it's a cracking record. But
it's great, but it's an album of songs entirely about people he knows who have died or like had horrible things happen. There are 2 separate relatives. Like, it's entirely nakedly autobiographical. There are 2 songs about relatives who have died in the same kind of freak accent separately, where they've accidentally thrown aerosol. They've been burning rubbish and they've thrown aerosols onto the fire and been killed by the exploding cans. Happened to 2 of his relatives. There are songs about each of them on this. There's it's
complaining he's repeating himself.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's a really bleak album. So it's weird that he broke through. What was not unexpected was that he reacted to the spotlight by being a complete prick, because that's pretty much the Kozilek MO. Is that
were you at the gig where he wore the screaming mask?
I wasn't at that.
No.
I have heard tell of the gig where he
refused to take it off.
He played on Halloween and wore the ghost face mask from Scream for the entirety. Refused to take it off for the entirety of the gig. I have seen him live before. He doesn't strike me as the most personable man on the planet, and so he's very good. He's one of these guys where you kind of have to separate the music from the man, because he doesn't seem like a particularly pleasant person. But if you haven't been keeping up with the various offstage dramas of Mark Kozilek this year, just Google Sun Kill Moon War on Drugs and take a trip. Maybe listen to the diss song he wrote aimed at the war on drugs with the lovely title of War on Drugs Suck My Cock, which came out this year.
Oh, the lovely War on Drugs.
Yeah, the lovely War on Drugs. Other than that, I think it's been one of the really interesting things for me this year about being a hip hop fan is that this is generally been marked as like the 40th anniversary of hip hop. Like Africa Bambaataa was touring this year. I saw him at the ABC a few weeks ago DJing, and the tour was the 40 years of hip hop culture tour or something like this. So hip hop's approaching middle age. You know, hip hop's now been around for a lot, like as long as rock, almost, as of our rock.
As long as punk rock,
as long as punk rock, yeah. So one of the things at Africa Bambaataa is a lot of bald spots, a lot of grey in hairs, a lot of punches, a lot of
Roddy Frame gig.
Roddy Frame gig, yeah. But it was almost like the kind of crowd you expect to see it, like a kind of heritage rock act, like a Fleetwood Mac or something. Yeah. There were guys there who were probably hitting in their 60s who maybe had been into hip hop since 40 years ago, and.
I think I used to go to Joe Strummer gigs, and that was exactly the same thing.
Well, it's the same kind of thing, I think. But now it's beginning to be reflected in the music as well. And a couple of my favourite hip hop records there are made by guys who are either hitting middle age or are properly middle aged already. Run the Jewels, who are the duo of LP and Killer Mike, who've both done really good solo work for years and years and years, but have really broken through to another level of success with this collaboration that they started in 2012. LP produced an entire album for Killer Mike, and Killer Mike guested on LP's album from that year. Last year they released their first collaborative album as Run the Jewels. It was a free download. It was almost more like a mixtape than an album. This year they released Run the Jewels 2, and the first one just feels like a warm-up for this. It's stunning, staggering, really incredible beats all the way through. It's political, it's funny, it's angry, it's a lot of fun. But that was one of my favourite hip hop albums of the year. I also really enjoyed Madlib's album this year. Madlib kind of, it's not too strong to call him a genius. I think he's a really kind of hip hop savant. Just makes mostly instrumental albums, but he's so prolific that it can be kind of overwhelming a lot of the time to keep up with.
A bit like Prince was in his heyday.
Yeah. And when he works with a single act or a single MC, it really gives him a focus, I think. He did it a couple of times. A few years ago he put out albums with Guilty Simpson and Strong Arm Steady, but this year he worked with Freddie Gibbs, and they put out an album called Pinata, which is tremendous. Just I think it's the strongest thing Madlib's done in a while, and Madlib's in his 40s now, which is hence the middle age thing, and Gibbs is a kind of veteran as well. He's only in his early 30s, but he sounds much older. He sounds like he's been through a lot. I really enjoyed that. Other than that, I really liked Nena Cherry's album from this year. Nena Cherry,
I agree. I thought it was great. I'm a big fan of Nena Cherry.
Was really into that. Another really strong album, Twilight Sad, this year. St. Vincent's self-titled album I thought was tremendous. I think she just keeps evolving and doing really interesting stuff. Again, like Francois and the Atlas Mountains, I think her touring with David Byrne has really rubbed off on her. You're seeing a lot of the way she's developing her stagecraft and the way she's integrating kind of her aesthetics into her music.
I think she's one of the more interesting artists around.
Yeah, absolutely.
In case you think I listen to nothing but Scottish music, I really enjoyed the new Brian Ferry album.
I haven't heard it.
No, even more. It's if you like kind of Avalonish Roxy Music Ferry, then it's right in there. I have to say I'm a massive fan of Brian Ferry, and I know that there's all sorts of things that come with that politically and everything, but you know what? Fuck it, I just think Ferry is brilliant. Beck's Morning Phase I thought was great, and it was like a follow-up to the album that came out in the early 2000s, Sea
Change.
It was a follow-up to that and similar vibe to it, and I love Sea Change, and this is great. And also Jenny Lewis's album, The Voyager. Big fan of Jenny Lewis, and we spoke to Lloyd Meredith about how we both kind of like Jenny Lewis, but we'd probably better not speak about that anymore. Just a few people to say that caught my attention during the Way year. Night Noise Team from Edinburgh, who sound to me like if air had come from Edinburgh. That's the kind of sound. There's disco, there's electronica, there's kind of unusual sounds going on there, and great song called Open Your Eyes by United Fruit, which came to my attention just recently. Joe Mango's album Transformuration, which we spoke about, which was remixes of Murmuration, and is again really worth checking out. It really works as one whole thing. It's not just a collection of tracks. Singer-songwriter called Owen Macaulay, whose album The Line I'm going to be writing out quite soon. Band called Natalie Price, who I think I described as the house band from a David Lynch movie. That's kind of how they feel. They are dark, and very well dressed, and I like that in my bands, I have to say. Emily Scott and the Fell Down Trio's Stray Lights, and the Hazy Jane's Language of Faint Theory, which I got wrong when I reviewed it, and I hope I've got it right that time. But I think as time really is cracking on, we'll just round up by talking about kind of some of the events of the year, because it was a monumental. Oh, Ian, before we do start, your stuff of the year musically.
I think the only shout I'll throw in there is for Sean Rao, and his album came out on I think 9th September on Anti Records. I've been a fan of the guy for a while. Went to see him at the Captain's Rest a couple of years ago, and it was still a Captain's Rest, and unfortunately he's not come to play in the UK since, which I'm quite upset about, so he's not on my sort of live music check. Yeah. But it's a great album. There's kind of band stuff on the album, and there's stuff where it's just him and a guitar, and you can tell in the recording that there's just the feel of it is all very raw, and I'm quite a fan of that. And he's got this big deep voice that I think is really quite captivating, and another great album from him. And he's lyrics, voice, and the production values,
the full package,
the whole lot.
Oh, that sounds good. What was the name again?
Sean Rao. Yeah, there's moments of Leonard Cohen, and then there's like some really bluesy stuff, and then there's like some kind of straight up Americana folk type stuff, and really good listen.
Okay, well, we'll move on to kind of events of the year, and there was one thing that kind of obviously divided everyone, and went on for a while. And obviously that was still games.
We each tread on each other's punchline there.
Yeah, so let's talk about referendum. I mean, it was, it kind of seems like a dream now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And there's not really much we can say, because we're, look away now if you want to know the result. It kind of happened. Exactly, yeah. But how do you feel Scotland's reacted, I suppose, after the kind of no vote? Because I think it's very interesting that we seem to be, certainly in this city, you wouldn't know that it was a no vote, would you, really? Yeah. That's the feeling. I mean, apart from the obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that's very interesting. And there seems to be, and I might be projecting this, but there seems to be a kind of forward drive of change. The winds of change, I believe the Scorpions.
Well, it's gone from this is a once in a lifetime event to we might have another one by the end of the decade. It just feels like it's
until we get the result.
Yeah, it feels like kind of like a fuse has been lit, and it's just there's like something like the genie's been let out of the bottle.
I guess there's not much to say about it really, and we will move on to Still Game in a second, but. What really delighted me was the amount of people that voted, and the age group of it was wide, and there's that was really pleasing, because I had gone through my voting life, if you like, thinking that nobody will ever vote more than 50% of any population. That's it. That's the very most you can hope for, and to get it up to the 70s and almost the 80s is just incredible.
Victory for political engagement.
It's a victory. It shows you that political engagement is not dead.
I just hope it stays. Like I hope a lot of people who got politically engaged over it continue to be, because it's easier to do when it's such a big and emotive thing. It's harder to do when it's just
local council elections. That's true, and there will be a dip, but You know, there's certainly a strength of feeling, I think, which will carry.
What was the turnout in Glasgow itself? It was like 70-75%, was it, or something? 75.
Or something.
And I was watching as it came in, and I was like, what the fuck, Glasgow? How come there's only 75% of you voting? Which is ridiculous, but I mean, you know, because that's
some
still
people can't get out of the house.
But yeah, but the fact that, like, you know, the turnout was projected to be so high, and it was like 85% across the whole country, and you're like, you know. So it feels ridiculous to have been disappointed that only 75% of people in Glasgow turned out to vote for it. But that was a.
You do think it's the biggest city?
Yeah.
So, but I know, I just thought it was an amazing. No matter what happens in the future, and you know, we can talk about what happened on the time. I think Ronnie mentioned it a couple of hours ago at the beginning of this thing. It did seem like a dream. It seemed like an odd, but you know, and one that I don't think we've quite woken up from yet.
It was a really the days itself, the day of the vote itself, and the day after were two exceptionally strange days, just for a variety of reasons, and one of which actually I getting it off air. I don't want to.
Okay.
I have a story, but I'm.
That's podcast gold. But what I'll say is, I've been up north, and I drove back into Glasgow on the night of the night after the night before, if you know what I mean. And you know, things were kicking off in George Square, and it was just the weirdest vibe I've ever felt in this city. But it seems that people haven't gone, well, that's it, and you know, it'll never happen again, as you say. It seems that people are too riled up by this to kind of let it go. Yeah. And you know, we'll see. So we also want to talk about the Empire Cafe briefly, which we went to, well, it was part of the Commonwealth Games. We've already established that none of us really took part in the Commonwealth Games much. I have to say, living in the city centre, Glasgow did feel, you know, spectacular. I mean, it really was a great buzz.
I played a gig actually at the Merchant City Festival on the Blackfriars stage, and it was fucking awesome because it was just looking out to a sea of people around the Merchant City, and obviously nobody was really interested in what we were doing, but that was fine. Like, just seeing all the buzz and all the people and big stages and that in the city centre, it was something that I think will stay with me for a long time.
Yeah. And the Empire Cafe was kind of connected to it, but it was basically looking at, it was Louise Welsh and Jude Barber, yes, thank you. Who had organised this thing that was looking at Glasgow's role in Commonwealth and Empire, and Scotland's role in Commonwealth and Empire. And it ran for a week, and it was just fascinating. We were lucky to be there at a few of the nights, and just fascinating looking at this thing, which hadn't really been, you know, in a city which has Jamaica Street and Merchant Cities and, you know, all these things, to kind of taught me a lot of things I didn't know.
Yeah, me as well, and it really stirred up a lot of debate about Glasgow starting to kind of formally acknowledge that history in a similar way to what Liverpool's done, really, with this sort of slavery museum, and start talking about it and put things out there.
Is there anything else about the year that you want to? You went to Still Game, didn't you?
I didn't go to Still Game.
Did you not?
I got them all tickets.
You were a conscientious objector.
I'm a conscientious objector. It's just I've never actually, like, I've never been like a total Still Game super fan. Like, I don't know that I've seen every episode of Still Game. You know, I like what I've seen of it, but it's never been something that I've been totally, absolutely committed to. So but my family they're all big
so
fans,
you know, they talk about weird phenomena, and I'm kind of semi-joking obviously, but for a sitcom to run at the biggest, you know, stadium in
12,000 capacity
for what,
21 night, it was 37 performances,
because they added
matinees and stuff.
So, you know, and sell them all out, I believe, is quite astonishing.
It's unheard of.
And you know, this is a sitcom which outside of Scotland is barely known.
Yeah.
There's something, I don't know what it is, I've no idea what it is, but there was something about that show. I don't know whether it was nostalgia or, you know, getting into things that people have been brought up with, but it was quite incredible. And, you know, I ended up going because someone got me a ticket, and you know, it wasn't brilliant by any means, but it almost didn't matter. It was almost this communal, like, we all know the gags and we all know the.
Yeah, I've not heard anyone say it was brilliant. Yeah. Like, most people who have been to see it that I've spoke to have said, yeah, it's all right, or it was a bit of a disappointment, but still the scale of it.
I mean, you know, it was like it was bigger than Prince turning up, which is.
Yeah,
I have nothing to say about that. I just think it's there's something in that I don't quite know what it is, but it's a strange situation.
Also opened the day after the referendum.
That's right. That's it. Well, that was my initial gag before you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's late in the evening. We've been doing this for a long, long time. I think we'll just kind of sum up there and finish off. So
we have been doing it for a long time, 50 episodes.
50 episodes, yeah. Oh God, it feels like it. Yeah. Chris, thanks again for coming and doing this, and all the previous ones that
thank you.
Cheers, Ian.
Cheers.
Here's to 50. And here's to the next lot, yeah. Well, we've got some interesting people lined up in the new year, which we can't tell you about yet. But thanks to all the podcast guests and I suppose our occasional partners over the first 50, like Empire Cafe, SLS, Cargo Publishing, Product Magazine, Dear Scotland. We've kind of done stuff with all of these people. And thanks to folk for listening, because it would just be us sitting around the table, which would be quite sad, really. So we'll see you in the new year with a whole load of new people, all of whom will be completely different. Cheers.